Red. This was an ambitious shoot using the Red Epic camera. We had only 2 hours to complete this short film. I changed the location at the last minute to a shaded area as we were shooting in the midday sun and the lighting was too contrasty in the original location. The key aim of this short film was to explore the possibilities of shooting at high frame rates up to 320 frames per second. Lens choices, however, were limited to Nikon photography lenses, of which I chose the 35mm as my preference. I was happy with the slow motion effects, but disappointed in the quality of the images. My expectations for this camera shooting up to 5K did not translate directly into an improvement in quality over the standard high definition. A taste of Rasa Sayang. Part documentary and part promotional film that could form the basis for a web series, I shot the interview section using the Panasonic AG-AF101. It was important to include the artwork and the chef's costume in the field of view, but at the same time get that shallow depth of field. I used a typical 3-point lighting system, but instead of a fill light I positioned the interview location to use the natural light coming through the window. The key light was fitted with a softbox and a backlight with a diffusion to soften and even the light across the subject. I used a Canon 5D fitted with a 100mm macro lens, alternating this with the standard zoom, that's the 24 to 105mm. I used this camera handheld without using a rig to film close-ups of the cooking and preparations of the ingredients, while the Panasonic was set to capture cover shots to make it easier for the editor to cut back to. The director has since decided that the footage from the Canon 5D was superior to the Panasonic, and so this features more significantly in the final edit. The sequences for the ingredients on the plates was achieved by suspending the camera over the plate and gently zooming in. I also made use of a slider for several of the shots. My overall aim was to follow the preparation and cooking of the food closely using the Canon with open apertures, typically f2.8 to 5.6, to get a nice shallow depth of field. New sketch. A studio and location based drama on a fictitious television news program produced as a web series. The camera, Panasonic AF101, was used for all the scenes both in the studio and on location. I also set up the studio's green screen and chroma key, positioning one of the studio cameras to provide the live images to the TV screen in the studio. I've graded these 2 location sequences. The first, in the field, I pushed the colours to the warm end of the spectrum, the reds and the oranges, and in the laboratory scene the cooler end, enhancing the blues and the greens. The laboratory scene was lighted with an 850 watt lamp fitted with a softbox, which helped to enhance the effect of the reflective surfaces. In the studio, after the initial setup, it became routine with the floor marked for camera position and lens details, so I could quickly transition from one setup to the next. For example, directly facing the news desk I used a 50mm lens positioned 2.5 meters away. For the profile shots I used 35mm, and for the wide shot 20mm. Also made use of jib and dolly to simulate the movement of a studio camera's pedestal. One unusual aspect was the simultaneous filming of the behind-the-scenes footage, differentiated by using the camera handheld, which surprisingly the director requested that I hold less steady than I was capable of to get that handheld look. The big challenge for me on this shoot was the lighting. With the failure of the air conditioning, I made the decision to limit lighting to low power Kino flows rather than the high wattage tungstens, just to keep the heat down. Although I had to use some low wattage tungsten lights to target specific locations, as of course Kino flows have no focusing and only produce a floodlight. Objection. a drama, short film featuring zombies and a futuristic armoured suit. There is also the option that this may eventually become a web series. This opening time-lapse sequence was shot using the Canon C300 and is actually a series of 5 clips shot continuously over an hour, which I then time remapped using After Effects to a 16-second clip. As in this clip, I'd agreed with the director that all the scenes with few exceptions would be shot using a jib and dolly setup. I was fortunate to have the Canon C300 for this entire shoot, which allowed me to shoot in low light conditions, as the interior scenes were actually much darker than they appear on screen. I had already decided how I was going to light the various locations after conducting a number of recces before shooting. I was generally pleased with my lighting choices for the interior scenes, but particularly for the lighting of the corridor, with LED lighting positioned inside each open doorway fitted with coloured filters, which not only illuminate the scene, but adds interest as the zombie transverses from blue to red as it approaches the end of the corridor and the feeding location. I also deliberately kept the camera unfocused until the zombie appears in the doorway, which I suspect was influenced by a similar scene from Skyfall. Lens choices. Because of location and its tight spaces, I kept to 50mm and wider, switching to longer lenses, particularly when I needed a shallow depth of field. Generally though, I had to use wide apertures because of the low lighting, which caused some focusing issues, as the depth of field was very shallow on occasions. In this scene, I enhanced the blues and greens of the room with LED lights fitted with blue and green filters. I particularly liked the rack focusing I used in this clip to move the focus point from the dilapidated light switch to the helmet. As the focus changes, it reveals the textures of the peeling paint on the walls. The same corridor, but different time of day. I pushed everyone in order to catch the perfect natural light coming through the open windows in the scene, as I knew it would not last. I've only lightly graded this scene in the final edit. A change in location and a new set of problems. This time too much natural light. In this scene using the jib and dolly, I've actually screened the natural light from coming through the windows using a partition, and then lighting the face using reflected light. In this scene I had to work with the natural light coming through the floor to ceiling windows. In this tracking shot I used an LED light panel handheld to follow the actress as she walks, so that her face is lighted rather than silhouetted against the windows. I've left space in some of these shots to allow for special effects which will be added later, for example the scrolling text from a head-up display and the green screen footage I'd taken earlier of the armoured suit and helmet. These next scenes form a key point in the narrative. I added red filtered lighting to help emphasise the changes that have occurred in the armoured warrior, as she becomes what she previously battled against. At the same time I had to balance this light with a front-facing white light to preserve the makeup, the greyed face. I worked with the director to position the actors to catch natural light coming through holes in the roof, creating this shaft of light on the face. I also shot the final scene with a Dutch angle to unbalance the audience. Sharks, a drama, a short film about the cutthroat world of corporate business. I worked with the director to scout out locations before filming, but lost key locations just days before filming started. This created several problems, but most importantly for me was the lighting. The opening sequence I always had in mind. It took some convincing on my part for the director to see what I was seeing, but in the end we reached agreement, and I think this has to be one of the best openings I have filmed on this course. This long dolly shot was achieved by me hand-holding a Canon 5D fitted with a 24 to 105mm kit zoom lens while being pushed in a wheelchair along the corridor. It then appears to join seamlessly to another dolly shot running the length of the table, which I achieved using a small skateboard style dolly and a Panasonic AF101. The night before the shoot, I got a message from the director saying that she wants to shoot in the 2.35 format, which to be honest was perfect for me as I'd wanted to do this for some time. Of course, the camera actually shoots in 16:9, so I masked the LVF with tape to simulate this format so that when it came time to crop, the framing would of course be correct. Shooting in this wide format does create issues with framing and with the positioning of the actors in relation to the camera and the set. I found the greatest difficulty when it came to framing actors of dramatically different heights. Fortunately, I'd just seen a behind the scenes of The Hobbit, where of course false perspective is used. I found myself often using the camera set very low or high on the tripod to match heights between actors in order to get both framed perfectly in the viewfinder. Lighting such a large set was also a problem. I managed this by using a Cinelight kit with the key light fitted with a softbox, and then zoned the set so that I could relocate the lights depending on where the action was to take place, rather than try and light the whole set in one go. However, as the shoot progressed, I noticed that the actors were struggling under the heat from the lights, and so I changed tactics and started to use the ambient and natural light whenever possible, and just add lighting as required, but limiting myself to a set of dado lighting. I was really happy with this shoot. On paper it appeared easy, but in fact it was quite challenging to both light and to film. Motorcycle Journals, Royal Enfield. This was the initial test shoot for the documentary and short film Motorcycle Journals that I had originally conceived. I used the Canon 5D fitted with the 24mm to the 105mm kit lens for all these shots. The concept was to film the B-roll to produce a trailer that I could use to show to my fellow MAs to entice them to work on my project. However, I ended up shooting over 2 days and had enough footage to make a short documentary as a standalone project. But I also could see the possibilities of creating an entire web series with Motorcycle Journals as the main title, and each subsequent episode having its own subject and title. Motorcycle Journals, Moto Guzzi Dondolino. I shot this footage using the Canon C300, changing lenses as required, but mainly the 14mm for the extreme wide shots, the 50mm and the 24 to 105mm zoom for the in-car footage. I set up the tripod in the boot area of my car, fixing its feet to the hatch area strapping points and restrained the top section with bungees. I then stripped the C300 down to its lowest profile, attaching the electronic viewfinder to the tripod's arm. I then preset the camera, locked off the tilt adjustment, just allowing the panning movements only. All the footage was shot on private roads with the permission of a landowner and with maximum speed limited to 20 mph. With the director positioned in the back seat, restrained by the seatbelt, we set off. The motorcyclist was given instruction to keep a set distance from the back of the car and to match speeds. I was quite pleased with the setup, and it set the template for future filming. Motorcycle Journals, Culture Motorcycles. Filmed using the Canon C300 using the 40mm, 50mm and 24 to 105mm zoom lenses. For the workshop scenes I maximised the aperture and used the built-in ND filters so that I could create almost a nighttime scene with a shallow depth of field. I used no artificial lighting, relying on natural light from a narrow window and a skylight to light the scene. I didn't have access to a macro or 200mm lens on this shoot, so I had to get the camera close to the lathe to capture the images of tiny strips of metal being cut from the aluminium billet. For the grinder scenes I used the glass frame from a picture to protect the lens zoomed in to get the close-up shots of the grinder sparks arcing across the workshop. For some of these shots I unfocused the image to get the bokeh effect and rack focus from the grinder to the motorcycles. In this scene I'm working perspective, rack focusing from the bike closest to the camera to the more distant bike. I'm using the zoom at 105mm with a very wide aperture to get a shallow depth of field, and position the camera very close to the ground to stretch the bike frame into the distance. Using a 14mm lens and the camera set low to the ground, with exposure set for the exterior, I filmed the bike in near silhouette as the garage door is opened. For this shot I've also closed the aperture down to give a deeper depth of field so that the foreground and distant objects appear in focus. Using the same setup as I used on the Moto Guzzi shoot, I set up for the camera to film from the back of my car. Again we are filming on private roads with landowner's permission. For the side shots I used a modified setup similar to the rear facing setup, as my car allows you to flip the rear seat out of the way to free up the whole floor area as a camera platform, filming through the open side window. This time, however, I used the 24 to 105mm lens so that the bike's framing could be adjusted. It was a relatively dull day and had just finished raining, but I still wanted a shallow depth of field, so I used 2 stops of ND filter and opened up the aperture to f4. Of course we had to have several takes to get positioning and focus right, but I think it works well in the final sequences. The footage in this film has not been stabilised in post-production, as I felt it was perfectly stable as shot and any movement visibly adds to the drama of the images. I wanted a very stylised film and used a cross-process grading in post-production, pushing the image towards the reds and the blues using curves. Motorcycle Journals, Moto Guzzi v Twin Valley. I shot this short sequence using the Canon C300, loose head mounted on a tripod, fitted with a 24 to 105mm zoom. I also used a polarizing filter. This short sequence was designed for an opening title for one of the Motorcycle Journal short films. The key thing in post-production was to desaturate and just leave one colour, and that's the Moto Guzzi red that you can see in the short video.